Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to Inside Politics. There was a time when Canada stood for opportunity. You worked hard, you got ahead. You saved, and you bought a home. You earned an education, and doors opened. That belief, that promise built this country. But today, that promise is broken. And if we don't change course, we're not just heading towards economic hardship. We're heading towards something much more dangerous. A Canada we no longer own, financially, politically, or socially. A recent federal report by Policy Horizons Canada painted a very bleak picture of Canada in 2040. That's just in 15 years from now. It described a country where hard work no longer matters. Upward mobility disappears. Post-secondary education becomes irrelevant unless you're already rich. And home ownership? Only if your parents bought in. The rest will rent for life, locked out of wealth, locked out of power, and locked out of opportunity. Now, this report wasn't leaked by critics or spun by commentators. It's not misinformation or a conspiracy theory. This report came from inside our very own government. Our own tax-funded research warns that we're on track to become a two-tier society, a society defined by inheritance, not effort. Now, let that sink in for a second. These are facts and they're irrefutable. Canada's own policymakers are preparing for a future where Canadians no longer believe they can build a better life. And in many ways, we're already there. I mean, the average home in Toronto costs over $1.1 million. In Winnipeg, we're creeping towards an average home price of over $400,000. Food prices are rising faster than wages. Tuition is soaring. Small businesses are suffocating under red tape and more taxes. And worst of all, we're now spending more to pay interest on our debt than we are on healthcare transfers to the provinces. We're borrowing money just to keep the lights on. This isn't sustainable, and it's certainly not responsible. So the question is simple. How long can a nation live beyond its means before it gets taken over by those who don't? Canada's federal debt now sits above $1.2 trillion. That's roughly $30,000 for every Canadian, including newborns. And that number doesn't include the provincial or municipal debt. Cities have debt, provinces have debt. It doesn't include the costs of our aging population, our collapsing infrastructure, or the climate policies we've put in place that have no real return. Last year, we spent $54 billion on interest payments. That's $54 billion gone. Nothing built, nothing fixed, just handed over to creditors. And those creditors are increasingly foreign banks, hedge funds, and even other governments. Now, that means we're beholden, financially and politically, to people and institutions outside our Canadian borders. Now, when a country loses control of its finances, it loses control, period. And if you want to see how this could end, look at examples like Sri Lanka or Argentina. Both borrowed too much for too long. Both defaulted. Both saw their governments replaced, their institutions crumble, and their people suffer. And they didn't fall to bombs or invasions. They fell to bad government policy, overspending by government. Now, I'm not saying that we're in that position yet, but the warning signs are there. A country that can't afford its own spending becomes vulnerable, just like you and I. It becomes vulnerable to influence, to buyouts, to collapse. Meanwhile, what are our politicians doing? What are political leaders doing? Promising more. This is all parties. They're promising more handouts, more programs, more bureaucracy, and more votes are bought with your children's money and your grandchildren's money. I mean, the new currency in Canada is future debt. And no one seems willing to say it out loud. We can't afford this anymore. We can't afford a federal government that takes in $500 billion a year, yet still runs a $40 billion plus deficit. We can't afford ministries that spend hundreds of millions of dollars on consultants while veterans sleep in tents. We can't afford climate plans that kill jobs but don't reduce emissions. And we definitely can't afford leaders who believe the answer to every problem is more government. Look, I believe Canada needs a reset, not slogans, a reset in structure. We need to shrink government, not grow it. We need to cap spending, not raise taxes. We need to stop treating borrowed money like it's free money. And we need to restore the basic principle that prosperity comes only from hard work, savings, and ownership, not dependence on the government. Because I believe if we don't, we're not just heading towards economic inequality. We're heading towards a country we no longer recognize, a country owned by a few, managed by the unelected, and held together by borrowed time. So what do? We speak up. We stop buying the lie that more spending equals more compassion and more opportunity. We stop expecting governments to solve every problem we have. And we start pushing for policies that make Canada strong, stable, and sovereign. Now, that means prioritizing Canada-made products. That's what we have to do. We're starting to do that, but we have to do that more. That means encouraging home ownership and making it affordable, not punishing home ownership. That means governments at the provincial level, at the municipal level, at the federal level have to cut red tape, not jobs. And that means restoring the dignity of self-reliance and rejecting the false comfort of government control. Because at the end of the day, the future is ours to shape, but only if we still own it. If we keep going the way we're going, we won't, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves.